Welcome to another GIMP tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to discuss aspect ratio and how that can really help you frame your photos the best possible way. Alright, so first let's take a look at what aspect ratio is, what it means. Alright, so aspect ratio is the relationship of the width of an image to its height. And that's the way it's expressed. So it's usually the width of the image, and I typically deal with pixels. It could be in inches, could be in any unit. But the units are the same between the width and the height. So it would be the width of the image in pixels, and then a colon, and then on the right side of that colon is the height of the image in pixels. So some examples are 1:1, which would be a square image, a 2:1 aspect ratio where it would be twice as wide as it is high, 4:3, which is like the old TV aspect ratio before the widescreen televisions came out, 16:9 or 16:9 is the aspect ratio for most of the widescreen, LED television. Some of them are 16:10. Mine is a 16:9. Okay, so I've got some examples for you guys, and there'll be a quiz at the end, so pay attention. All right, so this image is 1000 pixels wide by 500 pixels high. So what would be the aspect ratio of this image at 1000 wide by 500 high? Okay, that's right, it is 2:1. Okay, and this is expressed in the lowest common denominator, the lowest numbers on the left and the right side, just like finding the lowest common denominator in fractions. So both of these numbers are divisible by 500, right? So 1000 is divisible by 500. 500 will go into 1000 twice. That gives you your number here, 2. And 500 will go into 500 once. That gives you your other number, which gives you your aspect ratio of 2:1. All right, so moving along. All right, so this one is 1000 pixels wide by 750 pixels high. Getting harder, isn't it? Okay, so what's the aspect ratio of this one? Yep, that's right, 4:3. And the reason it's 4:3 is because both of these numbers are divisible by 250, right? 250 will go into 1000 4 times. 250 will go into 750 3 times. So your aspect ratio is 4:3, and this is the aspect ratio of the old style television sets, right? All right, moving on. All right, so here we have an aspect ratio. Here we have a width of 750 and a height of 750. Both of the width and the height are equal, so it's a square image. This one is a square image. So what would be the aspect ratio of this image? I know you're all going to get this one, right? 1:1. They're both divisible by 750, and 750 goes into 750 one time, right? So it is a 1:1 aspect ratio, which means it is a square image. All right, so I think this is the last one before the quiz. Okay, so here we go. This is the first image that we have that we would call a portrait mode rather than landscape. So in a portrait image, the height is greater than the width. In a landscape image is what I typically deal with. The width is larger than the height. All right. So in a square image is neither landscape nor portrait. But this one happens to be a portrait. So the width is 500 pixels. The height is 750. What would be the aspect ratio on this image? All right, I give you a couple of seconds. All right, and those of you who said 2:3, you're absolutely correct. So both of these numbers are divisible by 250 again, right? 500 is divisible by 250. 250 will go into 500 twice. That gives you your 2. 750 divided by 250 gives you a 3. So the aspect ratio is 2:3. This is the first image we've looked at as an example. where the number on the left is less than the number on the right. And that also signifies whether it's a square image, a landscape image, or a portrait image. Okay? All right, so now what I want to do is take you into GIMP. And we're going to put this into practice. So the image that I have here I took with my digital camera out in the desert. I actually used this image in another tutorial. There'll be links to the playlist for GIMP in the show notes if you guys want to take a look at some of the other tutorials that I've published. But this image, if you look up here, it shows you the size of the image. It's 5,184 pixels wide by 3,456 pixels high. All right, so I think that comes out to almost a 3:2 aspect ratio. All right, but not quite. They're not both divisible, you know, at the lowest common denominator. You don't get a whole number with this number here. But I think 3:2 is a very close proximity to the actual aspect ratio of this image. What's important in the GIMP is what image size do I want to get to in my final image. In other words, you're starting with a very large image and you're wanting to resize it. And most of my digital images are going to be that I deal with, I want in a 16:9 aspect ratio. 1920 by 1080. 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. That is HD widescreen resolution. Okay? So 1920 by 1080. And the aspect ratio for 1920 by 1080 is 16:9, the same as my television, right? So if in order to get it to 1920 by 1080, I'll use my aspect ratio to get the best possible framing that I can get on this much larger photo. So that is where aspect ratio really comes in handy, and it makes it really fast, you know. And it gives you the best framing that you're going to get on a large photo. When you got to cut out part of your photo to get your final resolution, using the aspect ratio is the way to do it. All right, so I'm going to put in, I've got it right here. I'm going to crop it. I've got my crop tool selected. I've got it set for aspect ratio. Now you can set it for width, you can set it for height, you can set it for a specific size on your crop. What I'm going to do is set it for my aspect ratio, which is 16:9, right? Just like it was expressed in the images that we looked at. So 16:9, that's the aspect ratio of the final image I want to get to. So I'm going to crop this, and I'm going to grab as much of this image as I can because I like the entire image. I don't want to just get a small portion of it. I want to get as much of it as I can in that final resolution in the final aspect ratio. So I'm going to move this down just a little bit. I'm going to crop off just a little bit at the bottom. And I'm going to crop off a lot more of the top of the sky because I kind of want to balance in my final photo. You just get the nice mountain range way off in the distance. I got about as much ground in front of the mountain range as I do sky in the background. That's kind of what I want to get in my image. I want to get a balance of the land and the sky separated by the mountain range. So I think that looks pretty good right there. So I'm going to crop that. Okay. Now my image size is, because I used the entire width of the image, but I had to crop off some of the height. So my resolution now is 5,184 by 2,916. And guess what? That's a 16:9 aspect ratio. So now if I go into image and I go into scale, and remember I want to get to 1920 by 1080 is my final resolution. So if I just change the width to 1920, and I've got the two chained together so that it maintains aspect ratio. When I hit tab with 1920 in the top, the height should change to 1080. Ready? I'm going to hit tab, and there we go. 1920 by 1080. So now I can scale that image to 1920. I'm going to maximize it in the screen here. Now it's 1920 by 1080. It shows you right up here, 1920 by 1080. Okay, so I'm going to load that original file back up, and then we'll see the difference in the two images from where I cropped it. But I think that looks pretty good. It is at the final resolution that I wanted to get it to, right? Okay, so let me open up the original file here, 5184 by 3456. Okay, there it is. All right, so I'm going to flip back and forth between these two tabs so you can see the difference. So in the original image, you can see here that it has a lot more sky. It has quite a bit more sky, I think, than it has ground. At least it appears that way. So if I look at what we cropped, that is a pretty good image for our crop and our final resolution, going from 5184 by 3456 to 1920 by 1080. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so now I want to show you something else in GIMP. And the reason that I'm showing you all this other stuff to begin with is because not all applications are as smart as GIMP. Okay, so GIMP is really smart. So if I just put in what my final resolution is going to be in my fixed aspect ratio here, and I put in 1920 by 1080, guess what? GIMP is going to calculate the aspect ratio for me. So as long as you know what your final, you should know, if you're going to resize an image, you should know what your final resolution is going to be. So for your fixed aspect ratio, just put in what your final image size is going to be, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to crop the image as best I can for the portion of the image that I want to get. Okay, so I think that's pretty close to where I had it before, right? I think so. All right, so I'm going to crop it there. And look at that. I got the same resolution that I had before when I was using the 16 by 9 aspect ratio, as opposed to putting in my final resolution, which is 920 colon 1080. It's going to be a 1920 by 1080. So as long as I put that on the left and the right side of the colon for my aspect ratio, it calculates it for me. So now I'm just going to go in. I'm going to scale this image again, and I will show you that that is the same. So if I change the width of the image by 1920 to 1920, when I hit tab, since the dimensions, the aspect ratio is chained together, when I resize it, it should maintain aspect ratio. This number down at the bottom should change to 1080. Okay, here's the tab key. There you go. 1920 by 1080. Now I'm going to go ahead and scale it. I'm going to maximize it in my screen again, and then I'm going to flip back and forth between the one we did previously using an aspect ratio of 16 by 9 with the one that we just now did with an aspect ratio of 1920 by 1080. And look at that. Boy, they're almost identical, aren't they? I was just a little bit off on the crop on the two different images there. But and you can see at the final resolution of both of these images is 1920 by 1080. That is the easiest, best way I have found at cropping and resizing images to where you get the best framing you could possibly get from the image that you start with. All right, and that's why aspect ratio is important. All right, so now you know how to calculate it manually, and you know how to put your dimensions into the fixed aspect ratio in GIMP to get the best framing and get the scale that you need. All right, so that's a wrap on this episode. As a reminder, there's a link to the playlist for GIMP and all the other software application and operating system tutorials that I've published on TinkerzLab. There'll be links to all that in the show notes. So enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in the TinkerzLab.